Hey there, it's Books with Mick here. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the March series by John Lewis, Andrew Aydin, and Nate Powell. This series has become popular again. Like, it's already been super popular. It's already been on the top of the New York Times bestseller list, but it became popular again because of a certain incident, and I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. That incident actually prompts me to buy this series. Number one, because for Black History Month, I stated that I only want to read Black authors this month, and number two, I never read a graphic novel series before, and I figured this is the perfect way to start. And I'm so interested about John Lewis and what he did for the civil rights movement. Like, I know the basic stuff, but I kind of just wanted to know more and more about what he did for the civil rights movement, so I was like, I definitely have to pick this up. Okay, so the March series, where do I start? The three books focus on different parts of the civil rights movement. For example, book one focuses on the restaurant sit-ins. If you were a Black person, you were not allowed to sit at the lunch counter at restaurants, and John Lewis and a bunch of other people staged sit-ins, and it was like a form of protest. So that's what this book focuses on. Book two focuses on the Freedom Ride, which is basically they wanted to test the ruling that you could not segregate buses anymore. They rode from Washington DC into the Deep South on buses, and of course a lot of things happened because of that, because even though it was a federal ruling, people were not enforcing it in certain states, and because of that there's a lot of police brutality going on. People are getting arrested just because they sat in the wrong, like, quote-unquote wrong seat of buses. And book three, which was like my favorite, I think, this talks about the 4 little girls who were killed in a church bombing in the Deep South, and this also talks about the struggle to get equal voting rights for Black people. This one was jam-packed. It was the longest of the three, and I think this one was my favorite because I finished it in one sitting. I thoroughly enjoyed these books. They were absolutely amazing. Like, of course we grew up knowing about Black history, but the things that were laid out in this book are things that I've never ever learned. Like, I'm from South Carolina, so like the way that I didn't know that some of this stuff happened until I read these graphic novels is like super crazy. A lot of this stuff happened in the 60s, and when you think about how law enforcement and government like kind of enforce these segregational laws, like, it's really kind of no surprise that the political climate is the way it is today. It kind of puts things in perspective. I know a lot of people were surprised as we hear more and more about the current political climate, but when you kind of read these books, it's like, wow, 1960 wasn't that long ago. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go, and it was just something that was really eye-opening for me. Like, for example, I knew that Rosa Parks was arrested for not sitting in the back of the bus, but what I didn't know is that the bus boycott lasted for over a year, and that people were walking miles and miles to work just so they wouldn't ride the bus, and so they got equal rights. That's something I didn't know. I didn't know that it lasted that long, and that's like amazing to me. I knew about the sit-ins. I knew that people were sitting at lunch counters at restaurants to protest the unequal treatment that Black people were getting in restaurants, but what I didn't know and what I learned in these books is that they actually hosted workshops for each other where they would say mean things to each other. They would hit each other. They would spit on each other just so when it came time to like confront the racist people that didn't want them in these restaurants, just so that they could handle it without reacting in a violent manner, because John Lewis and his organization was all about nonviolence. They really believed in nonviolence. Like, that is a really big part of their particular movement, and I just think that is so honorable, because how many people could react to something like that in a nonviolent way. The voting rights thing is something that really stuck with me, and it's something that I'm going to think about for a long time. Black people were literally beaten, fired from their jobs, arrested, and assaulted for even trying to register to vote. And then sometimes when they did try to register to vote, they had to do ridiculous tasks, like they had to guess how many bubbles were on a bar of soap, or they had to guess how many jelly beans are in a jar before they could register to vote. And it was like really obviously unconstitutional, and John Lewis and everyone involved in his movement was like, you know, this is not right. Like, we will fight as long and as hard as we can. This is definitely a book club read, because I wanted to stop and talk about everything that went on every single page, because every single page is jam-packed with knowledge. So there are all these different drawings and specific dates and speeches and all kind of stuff. Like, it's just amazing. Like, this should be like required reading. I wanted to talk about it all the time. I always was Snapchatting pages from the book, or Instagramming pages from the book, or telling people about, like, hey, did you know X, Y, and Z? Because I didn't know this until just now. Like, It was just amazing, and I'm so glad that I was like put in a position where I felt like I was obligated to buy this book to support John Lewis, because this is just like, it's absolutely amazing. It's jam-packed with information. One thing I will say is that I'm so glad that these books were in graphic novel form, because although this information is so good and it's so important to know, it did kind of make me sad a little bit just to see the stuff that Black people went through, just to see these things and how they were treated just for wanting basic human rights, like sitting wherever they want to in the bus or restaurant or voting or just living their lives. It did kind of put a damper on my mood. It made me feel empowered that they were so diligent and resilient, but at the same time it did kind of make me a little sad to kind of see this stuff play out on pages. So that's why I really like the idea, and I really like the fact that it was in graphic novel form, because since it was in graphic novel form, it really kind of, it helped me digest it a little bit more than maybe I would have. The illustrations really played a part, and don't miss the illustrations when you read this. They really bring a lot to the story. There's so much that I could say about these graphic novels. I could literally go through each and every page. I've bookmarked things, I've taken notes to research things even further, because like I said, there's so much I didn't know. I was actually talking to my mom about it, and she was like, you know, people think about slavery and the Jim Crow South as one big thing, but we never really take out the time to look at the individual incidents that really made up the movements. And I think it really humanizes it in a way, because we think of slavery and Jim Crow South as something that happened like way in the past and it'll never happen again, and it happened to these people but it never happened to us. But these are things that have really happened, and if you think about it, the 60s was not that long ago. John Lewis is still alive, so it's like people lived through this and they're still alive today. People who perpetuated this kind of stuff are still alive today as well. So it's like something you really have to think about, and it just really put everything in perspective for me. And I just really loved it. It was a good time. I loved reading it. Yes, it did make me sad, but I am so glad that I purchase these books because they're so amazing. Obviously I give them 5 out of 5 stars, and it's one of those books that I would want everyone to read. It's one of those books that I would always recommend to someone. This is a series that I would buy for other people just so they can read it or have in their collection. It's something that I could revisit one day, and it's something that I definitely won't want to pass on to my future children. So if you're kind of on the fence about buying these, please buy them. They're so good. They're amazing. Of course, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X make appearances in these books, and I've learned things about them that I didn't learn anywhere else through these graphic novels. So definitely pick these up. I think they're still available on Amazon. Thank you guys for listening to this, and thank you guys for tuning into my channel, and I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye.